women who struggle with perfectionism, whether or not they realized it
Yes.
before motherhood. It kind of comes to a head in motherhood where so much is out of their control.
Welcome to The Couch is Yours. My name is Davriel J. Peters. I am a licensed mental health counselor, clinical traumatologist, and author. Now, during these conversations, we try to provide a safe space to discuss all things related to mental health. These are human experiences, which are subjective to everyone. If at any time you feel triggered by these conversations, feel free to log off and take a step back. If you feel like you are in crisis or would just like to work on things that you've heard addressed here today, you can feel free to click the link in my bio and select mental health resources to get the assistance that you need. The goal of this series is to allow those who listen to recognize they are not alone and that they can always grow, heal, and evolve into who they want to be. With that being said, welcome back to The Couch is Yours. Today, we have a very, very special guest, and it's so funny when you meet people and you instantly click. You are aligned in, your values and just wanting to bring about change. And that's exactly what happened with me and this next guest. I am pleased to introduce to you Kameela Osman. She is a social worker and a psychotherapist. And I just want to ask her to tell us just a little bit about herself. Hi,
Hi.
Kameela.
Hi, Gabrielle. Thanks for having me. As you said, I'm a registered social worker and I'm a psychotherapist based in Ontario, Canada. I have a clinical focus on perinatal mental health, couples therapy, and anything mindset related. On the personal side, I'm a mom of two. I'm originally from Trinidad and I have a passion for talking about therapy, making therapy more accessible, especially for women of color and immigrant families who may not see themselves reflected in traditional mental health spaces. A lot of my work is about bridging the gap between cultural narratives and mental wellness. And my own journey into motherhood helped me, find that path of wanting to have that focus on perinatal mental health.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I guess from what Camila would have already shared with you, you can probably kind of get the hint about where this discussion is going to go, right? So Camila, can you tell us a bit about your background and what exactly drew you to focus on prenatal mental health? Like, what exactly does prenatal mental health even mean?
Yeah, and so my journey, as I mentioned, called me to this. I experienced postpartum depression. So I was a therapist before I had kids, and none of that saves you from makes you immune to struggling with your mental health. And I
Wow,
didn't
good point.
realize it till probably I was getting better that I was struggling with postpartum depression. So I struggled with that with my first, and then incurred some perinatal anxiety with my second. But by the time I had my second, I was very mindful that I struggled with my mental health with the first, and I was able to navigate some resources probably better than most just because I was already in the field, which made me have, of course, more empathy for how difficult it would be for a mom who isn't familiar with mental health or that space to find some of those resources because it wasn't easy to navigate, thus wanting to then be part of that, show up for someone in a way that I didn't have those resources for myself, especially in our communities, sort of BIPOC communities. It made a difference to me. And there was a second part of your question that I forgot there.
No problem. I really just wanted to have you educate our audience on what exactly is the difference between general mental health and prenatal mental health.
Yeah. So prenatal would be before pregnancy, covering trying to conceive, fertility challenges. You'll notice that I use the term perinatal, which is both. So it's pre as well as postpartum. And so the
Okay.
perinatal, it covers that whole spectrum of trying
Period
to
of time.
conceive, fertility challenges, pregnancy, and postpartum. Postpartum medically is a year after having birth. However, in terms of mental health impacts, mix. I work with moms who struggle. They have a 3-year-old and they're struggling. They have an
Yeah.
8-year-old and they're struggling. That maternal mental health term is a broader term and it expands into the parenting journey itself.
Okay, so maternal mental health is different from perinatal mental health? Okay.
They can be used interchangeably because maternal mental health refers to mothers. I do use them sometimes interchangeably, but I prefer perinatal mental health because it encompasses the fact that there's a mental health struggle that can come up that's unique in the trying to conceive phase with fertility
Right.
challenges, sometimes pregnancy
We're gonna
losses,
get into
and
that.
things like that. Yeah, so it's not just mothers that are vulnerable, even though there is an increased vulnerability for mental health struggles in the postpartum phase. That increase in vulnerability starts from the time you're trying to conceive. For some women, some of that is induced from the time, they're in a relationship that people in their life might start asking them and putting some of that pressure. When are they going to have kids? Whether or
Boy,
not they're actively trying to conceive, it starts to uptick some of that mental health struggle.
wow. Why exactly is it even important for people to understand that mental health concerns can begin before pregnancy, during pregnancy, and not just after childbirth?
Yeah. Pregnancy is often romanticized. And so, this idea of, if you're in a relationship and you get married, you should be trying to have kids. And again, some of these are old narratives that have existed. And then we have media and all of that pouring into that. And so, with that romanticized idea of what pregnancy would be like, what, trying to have a baby would be like, all of that, women are often left then wondering like what's wrong with me when they find themselves struggling, feeling like their body is failing them or feeling like they must be doing something wrong if they're struggling relationally in this time. But the reality is there's, as I mentioned, like the vulnerability in this time, there are layers. And so we've got
Yeah.
hormones, our own physical health, past trauma, fear of childbirth that can come up, and then, fertility struggles that can come up at this time. Early intervention with any mental health issue, but including the perinatal mental health, can make a big difference, which is why it's important to know and talk about mental health in this time.
Definitely. I love that answer. So well said. In your experience, what are some of the most common perinatal mental health challenges that you see in your practice?
We often refer to PMADs, which is perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And so there are a number of challenges. We often talk about, and you may hear in media and whatnot, postpartum depression often gets a lot of attention. But there are other mental health challenges that can come up in this time. Anxiety is probably the biggest one that I end up working with. A lot of intrusive thoughts and fears that something's going to happen to baby or about environment. And there's some natural reasons for that. Like the mind wants to scan the environment and make sure that things are safe. And so sometimes, even without any provocation or past trauma, that anxiety can also uptick. I also see a lot of women who struggle with perfectionism, whether or not they realized it
Yes.
before motherhood. It kind of comes to a head in motherhood where so much is out of their control. It's almost like
Right.
you're coping with it and compensating for it. And same for anxiety. You're able to control your life and manage the anxiety, but when things start to become out of your control or less predictable, it comes to a head. Guilt, burnout, relationship strain are some of the other ones. So it's not just the PMADs, as I said, the diagnosed mental health issues. Sometimes it's other things, like as I mentioned, the perfectionism, guilt, relationship strain, and then the other one is many women will grieve their pre-mom selves. And I don't mean just body, but also life, being
Right.
able to go out, being able to have a long shower. All of these
Yeah.
life changes are real too.
It's such a huge change. It is. And I am so happy that we're having this conversation because I don't think we really understand the changes that women go through when they are having a child. And it's not, to your point, not just a physical change, but it's also a psychological change. I had a conversation just yesterday with a new mom, first time mom, and we were talking about baby blues. And I really wondered if people know the difference. So, how can someone distinguish between baby blues and something that's a bit more serious, like postpartum depression or anxiety?
So the baby blues are really common. Reportedly, they say about 80% of moms experience the baby blues. Now, that's the reported number. So there is probably a portion of moms who experience this that don't talk to anyone about it and probably are uncaptured in that number. And it makes sense. We're going through all these chemical changes in our body to have and sustain life of that little one. And suddenly all of that drops because we lose placenta and we lose, but the baby is born and so forth. And so our body is going through that transition. And so a key marker to notice the difference between the baby blues and something a little bit more serious like postpartum depression or anxiety is that baby blues should resolve within the first 2 weeks. So if
Okay.
feelings of sadness, anxiety, anger, numbness, scary thoughts, anything affecting
Yeah.
daily functioning, is creating a disconnection with self or baby, that's when you might want to take a deeper look if it goes beyond that first 2 weeks. The intensity and the duration are those key differences. And so, even if it's in the first 2 weeks, if it's really intense, don't wait. I encourage moms to, don't take that stat of baby blues resolve themselves in the first 2 weeks and wait. If trust yourself, attune to yourself. If it's feeling really intense, don't minimize that this is just the baby blues and, not talk about it. If you're having concerning feelings, thoughts, make sure loved ones know, make sure your medical professionals are aware. They can keep that check. Let's follow up in 2 weeks and see how you're doing then. And, again, loved ones can kind of keep you in check of like what's happening for you, talk through it. Sometimes with baby blues, it might be just tears and you don't know. And there's that different
Right.
why they're coming or where they're coming from. Again, there's that difference between I'm having these feelings and thoughts, and it feels odd to me versus I can't see that. I'm just completely absorbed in it, and it
Right.
feels very crisis mode, life or death, and I need to escape. And so having more suicidal ideation, that kind of thing.
Wow. No, that distinction is so important. And I think it was very needed because a lot of women may be experiencing what they think may be baby blues and they may be probably belittling their own experiences. We're really good at invalidating our experiences and they may think, oh, I can handle this. I can do this on my own. Only
It's
to
3 months.
realize, like you said, it's
Yeah.
been like 3 months, it's been 4 months,
No,
and
then that's not baby
you
blues.
are,
And yes, and I hear people,
yeah,
well-meaning people in our life may also like mislabel it. And so it's baby
right.
blues, it will be okay. No, if it's 3 months out, something is going on. Let's, talk about it, whether that's, medication or not medication or therapy or, just being more mindful of what's going on and using those self-care strategies.
Definitely. Wow. Well, I am someone who is obsessed with trauma and working on trauma and addressing trauma, not overlooking trauma. So I really wanted to ask, what role does trauma or even previous mental health challenges play in perinatal outcomes?
It plays a huge role. As I mentioned, it's one of the most vulnerable things and transitions a person can go through. It's not just physical, emotionally, relationally is the other piece to perinatal mental health. And it's a time when unresolved experiences can often resurface. And so sometimes in pregnancy and postpartum, I'm working with people who are having their childhood trauma come up, unmet attachment needs
Wow.
come up. Even the way that we were parented can become all activated. Things that we thought we had moved past is settled now can kind of rise to that surface. So for example, someone who never felt emotionally safe growing up may be overwhelmed by emotional demands of parenting, communication patterns that once worked or at least went unexamined start to unravel in the stress of new relationships or even sleep deprivation. Shifting identity can lead these things to resurface. And so it's not really a regression, but it is something that can get like reactivated. And even those without a trauma history, prior anxiety or depression,
Right.
different things come up. And so, it's really important to know that perinatal mental health is not just about baby, it's about the whole person. And sometimes the pregnancy and trying to conceive journey itself can bring trauma of itself. The
Wow,
trauma of
that's a huge
fertility
point.
challenges, the trauma of pregnancy loss, birth trauma. And so it is important to be mindful of, and, as you say, your passion for trauma, that reality, like trauma sounds like a big, heavy word, but it's when we have intense experiences, our brain and our body wants to hold that data to say, I never want to feel like this again. And it imprints. And so I know that some may sometimes feel like our new generation is too sensitive and we're calling everything trauma as I talk about birth trauma, but that can stay with you. A baby in the NICU, that experience can stay with you. A
Gosh,
pregnancy loss, it can stay with you. It's almost like, and maybe you're familiar with this, the idea of like these emotions and feelings need to be metabolized. They need to be processed and talked through, and not just through talk. Sometimes it's somatic exercises to help our body feel through them and kind of close that loop.
definitely. As you were speaking about that, I thought just about expectations. As women, the expectations that we have, you mentioned a little earlier, that perfectionistic trait that some of us have. And I do wonder how our expectations of this journey, especially for a first time mother, how that can impact the actual journey itself, right? The expectations of the conception process and the pregnancy process and even labor, like the whole thing, our expectations. And even as you said, even after labor, something happens, your baby is probably, premature and they have to stay in the NICU. How do expectations influence our experience?
Gabrielle, I talk about this so much in therapy. What I often find I'm supporting is an expectation reality gap. So, again, because we don't talk about so many things that could happen in pregnancy,
Right.
it will be fine. And some of it, rightfully, I get we don't want to induce anxiety for an expectant mom. But to a certain point, what that leaves her feeling is more in the unknown. Why is breastfeeding so challenging? Everyone said it just happens. It will work the way it's supposed to work. And that's one thing that, I experienced firsthand that I had, and that's part of where I struggled in my mental health. Breastfeeding wasn't, it didn't come naturally. It
Right.
was really difficult. And everyone will have different experiences in their pregnancy or trying to conceive pregnancy postpartum journey. But again, these pieces of um, learning and talking about what are these challenges and struggles women can have can help close that expectation reality gap. So it's not too surprising isn't the word I'm looking for, but shocking.
Yeah.
It's
But you
not
can
something.
you prepare yourself mentally for it, right?
Exactly. And then you're not feeling, this is the only thing, or I'm the only one that this is
Alone.
happening to. Why is
Right.
this happening to me? What did I do wrong? And sometimes, that narrative may come
Yeah.
by people who aren't so well meaning in our life. And,
Yes.
it can enforce self judgment, self criticism, and struggles with mental health.
Wow. I think this is such a fascinating conversation to have. Probably for me specifically in this period of my life, just getting married. And, like you said, that's usually the topic of conversation, right? First, they're pressuring you, when are you getting married? When are you getting married? And as soon as you say I do, and you walk out of the church, they're like, okay, when are you getting pregnant?
It
Or
doesn't
when is the
stop.
baby coming? So this is definitely really educational for me and eye-opening for me having this conversation. And I really hope for our listening audience as well that they are learning from what you're sharing. Maybe they've had a child already and now this conversation helps normalize their experience, or maybe they are going to be a first time mom. And like you said, they can now not necessarily, it's not to induce fear, but it is to how do I regulate my expectations? How do I get educated, get informed? I really hope this conversation does that. And so, if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to leave it in the chat and we will respond to them. Today's episode is sponsored by Evolving You Counseling and Family Services,
which provides quality, affordable therapy to clients throughout the Caribbean and Florida. Now let's get back to the couch.
Okay, so moving on with this conversation, I think another really important topic when we're talking about this to bring up is women that experience fertility issues. So, women with PCOS, women with fibroids, these things are seemingly like on the increase with a lot of women. So, does how do these issues, these illnesses, these medical issues impact the mental health of a woman who is now going to embark on this journey?
There's often a silent grief that comes with these kinds of conditions and struggles. And as we're talking about mental health, it's, a path is to break that stigma. It's an important piece, whether you're supporting someone like this or you're going through this yourself, but to recognize that there can be the sense of feeling betrayed by your body, feeling ashamed, feeling anxious about the future. And
Wow.
so struggling with this, you can have almost like a cycle of hope and heartbreak. I'm hopeful that the next trying to conceive attempt will work, and then it doesn't.
Yes.
And you're trying to stay hopeful because everyone says don't be stressed and all of these things to try to conceive, but then you're holding stress and you're holding fear and you're holding anxiety. Um,
Wow.
and so it is really complex, and the best thing that we can do is be compassionate with ourselves and acknowledge that it's natural. Instead of don't be anxious or don't hold stress, it's natural to be anxious with this. It's natural and it's okay. And that's what I mean by self-compassion. The same comfort and care, empathy you would offer someone else struggling with this, bring that back to yourself if you're the one going through it. Bring compassion to someone else if you're supporting someone else through it, and be gentle with yourselves. Trust who you can trust. And so, you will figure out who are your safe people that you can speak to about these issues, and don't hold it to yourself. If you don't have someone in your personal life to explore some of these things with, try your family doctor, try, if you're working with an OB, try your OB, and you can always seek out therapy. It can make a difference to talk about it and know you're not alone through it too.
Definitely. No, like I said, there seems to be an increase,
Hmm.
and you will know better than I would if there actually statistically is an increase with these diagnoses. But this is so important. What you just said about not people telling you not to be stressed, because the stress, to be honest, is not helping your body at all with these conditions. If anything, it's making it worse. But also feeling like your body betrayed you, your body that all your life you had these, again, expectations, this vision of being able to have an easy conception, because in your mind your body was made to, right, grow this life that you've been waiting for. And here it's difficult, it's not happening the way you expected it. For some people it takes years. And funny enough, I've been doing a study on barren women in the Bible, and
Mm.
I think there are about 6 to 7 barren women, and all of them, each and every one of them, brought forth a child that changed the world.
Mm.
And that was so healing to see, because we think a lot of times when we are experiencing what could be perceived barrenness that, like you said, something is wrong with me. This is a sin. I've done something wrong. God is punishing me. But here in the Bible, each and every single time there was a barren woman,
Mm.
yes, it didn't come when she expected it. It didn't happen the way she expected it. But each and every time, she brought about a child that brought about such change. And I think that that was really profound and healing. So if anyone out there is experiencing these issues, I really want to encourage you, like Kameela said, reach out to safe spaces because you need the support during this time. And even when it feels hopeless, still hold on to hope, because hey, you don't know when the time would be, but just stay with faith and really, like I said, do therapy. You may need someone to talk through it, someone who would just give you that safe space to release all of that stress and anxiety that you may be feeling about your journey not looking picture perfect the way you thought it would have. All right. So now I want to talk a bit about our joint culture, which is our Caribbean culture. There's so many old wives' tales that are related to pregnancy. And I do wonder how these can affect our mental health or the mental health of an expectant mother. How do you see these influencing women today?
You know, I think some can be comforting. Maybe they come from a place of well-meaning, but many end up causing anxiety. They end up leaving a mom feeling like she can't do any right. She can't do this. She can't do it the way that, is recommended by the doctor or, learn on her own. It can add guilt. It can add fear. It can add anxiety. Simple things like don't cry when you're pregnant because the baby will suffer. Not exactly wrong. There
Wow.
is in vitro impact, but how are you going to tell a pregnant mom whose emotions are heightened, who will likely be crying at things that she never cried before to not cry because her baby will suffer? It discourages emotional expression, which is so needed at this time. And so it's really important to just, put it through a bit of a filter. What's this going to do? How is it going to land? And so I use that language of intention versus impact. So I may intend to say something really kind. I may want to caution mom. But most expectant moms or women in that trying to conceive space are already hypervigilant. We are living in an
Definitely.
information overload world where you talk about things and it's popping up on your social media. And so, and this is where I see the higher rates of anxiety in the perinatal mental health space. And so moms who are overloaded with information don't need more customs or to be reminded of, these old wives' tales. That's just going to increase anxiety. And it's not to say that some of them may not tie back to fact. It's just that she's probably going to come across that information already. Maybe ask questions instead of sharing what you think is a
I
safe.
love that. Oh my gosh. Ask questions. Yes, yes. It definitely changes the perspective from one of judgment and critique to hey, I'm open to have a discussion. I'm open for you, right? Like, because she may want to actually learn.
Yes.
But if you are coming from a space of these old wives' tales, which, like you said many times, makes the woman feel condemned, then she's not going to feel safe enough to learn from you. On that same note, when it comes to Caribbean culture and attitudes, do you see a difference in working with women when it relates to perinatal mental health with your clients in Canada or like I work with clients in Florida? Do you see a difference versus the Caribbean?
The mental health stigma exists across the board. I will say there is an added pressure that can sometimes come up in terms of those of us who are abroad or in the diaspora. The reality of adapting to a new system while holding on to cultural values. Sometimes there's cultural clashes. If you're in an intercultural relationship or an interfaith relationship, it can
Right,
add complexity to the dynamics that are happening there. There is the idea, I will say it like this, there's the idea that there's more openness to mental health supports in North America. However, there can still be that limitation of feeling safe to access it. Some fear because of the nuances of racism abroad. And sometimes it's, again, validated. We know, for example, that Black mothers die more in pregnancy than other mothers, than white mothers. And so that reality that, some of that fear may be valid, it makes the nuances very complex. And so mothers will sometimes fear speaking up, fear saying that they're, experiencing postpartum depression or they're having really scary thoughts because doctor call CAS. And so I don't want to minimize that. That's a reality for some moms. It's complex in that way. It doesn't mean that a mom shouldn't seek support though. And so
right.
that's where it gets tricky. What I would suggest if you're feeling like like you can't speak to the people who are your people, like your medical health professionals, is reach out to one of those agencies that specialize in perinatal mental health because they will understand. They're, as a perinatal mental health therapist, that's one of the things that I will assure a mom who just disclosed a scary thought. I would remind her, like, great, you're talking about it. Thank you for sharing. That's the most important piece. I'm not, picking up the phone to call anybody. I'm sitting with you to hold space and support you.
You just added another layer there, right? That many people probably in a Caribbean wouldn't think about those experiencing it outside the things that they have to deal with. So I really thank you for sharing that perspective. I also do think about how our generations have changed. And I wonder now, are you seeing a trend with women having children at a later age? And if you are noticing that trend, what are the positive and or negative impacts that can happen psychologically?
Definitely. I think, interculturally that is happening, that people are having children later in life. It can bring emotional maturity, stability, financial stability for sure, but it can also
Yeah.
bring about increased anxiety around health, fertility, grief over what didn't happen earlier, fear around, will my body be able to keep up? There's so much. And then there's the valid implications in terms of health issues that can come up when we're conceiving later on in life. Social comparison, of course, on a mental or
Yeah.
emotional level can also creep in. And so it is nuanced, as you say, like there is pros and there are cons. And essentially like everything else, it's really what's your timeline? And we can't resent our journey.
I love that piece of you can't resent your journey because your journey is your own. And we have a lot of comparisons, especially in this age of social media, where you see different people, you see what they're experiencing, or at least what they show you. And we compare our own journeys. I'm not there yet. I didn't have my child yet. They already on their third child. I'm at this age. Will I be too old? Right? So there is a lot of comparisons that happen, which negates our own experience. So I think there's power in recognizing how unique, it's almost like a thumbprint, our journeys are. Each one is so unique and so nuanced. What role do you think partners and even extended families, right? But I would love to hear specifically to partners, extended families, and even our communities play in supporting our women who are going through this perinatal mental health journey.
And so they can be our lifelines and definitely a protective factor or our stressors. It really depends on
Yes.
who we have around us and sometimes what's coming up for them as we talk about how trauma can come up too. And so sometimes, and I've worked with people who's like, we had such a great relationship and then in pregnancy, postpartum, things kind of fell apart. Sometimes that's a flag for like our childhood stuff or other stuff that's unprocessed coming up in that time. And so kind of just being mindful of what's happening in our relationship, what's happening for ourselves can help that difference between, are we supporting our partners or are we adding to stress? Are we now becoming a risk factor to them and their wellness? Yeah. And this is the same thing with families. It can make a huge difference. Like I said, family dynamics, cultural norms can really make a difference. It's important that, and we hear this all the time, you need a village. The village is important, but it's important that that space has space for vulnerability, has space
My,
for compassion and empathy, and isn't just adding pressure and stress.
you are preaching. Oh my goodness. I had this conversation with a client. She's currently pregnant, and you summed it up so beautifully when you said they can either be your lifeline or a stressor. And that is so true. And I really hope that this conversation goes not just to those women who will be on this journey, but I hope they share it with their loved ones, with their partners, with their family, with their parents, because it is so true that during this time, it's such a sensitive time where women need the support more than ever. And there's no doubt that the partner would also be experiencing their own triggers during this journey. I'm so sure of that, especially if there was work that they left unresolved, they definitely would be triggered as well. But like you said, cultivating a space that is safe for vulnerability is so important. So important. This, the client that I was telling you about, we were talking about how, again, our time has changed from being a more collectivist culture versus now a more individualistic culture. And traditionally, when we were more collectivist, the whole village, the whole family used to take part in raising the child, like literally. There would be wet nurses so that mom could rest and mom could recuperate, and some aunt or person or woman that was in the village would take care of the child and see about the child's needs. So that child was always feeling loved and supported and taken care of. But mom was also able to recuperate, right? Different women go through natural births, but some of them also do C-sections, which takes time to recover. And now, this role that used to be an entire community has now fallen predominantly on the shoulders of one person, and that's mom. And that's why it feels so overwhelming. So I love that you said that either a lifeline or a stressor. And we are asking and advocating for moms in this conversation that those that support mom be a lifeline, be that safe space, be that person she can turn to and be emotional and cry and just experience all the things that's happening in her body, because a lot is happening in there. A lot.
For her
Yeah.
life too, like all of those transitions that she's going through from being able to meet friends whenever she wanted, when being able to, and it's not that she can't do that, but it feels limiting. She herself may be caught in this ambivalence of I want to be able to go out, but I don't want to leave baby, and going through fears and whatnot. And I will say, as we talked about trauma, because emotions are so high, because this is such a vulnerable time, trust me, I've worked with couples who have adult kids and they remember how their partner or family showed up or didn't show up, how partner set a boundary or didn't set a boundary with in-laws or whoever it may be. And so it becomes a bit of an imprint. It is a vulnerable time and you can do some significant damage to your relationship. So more so for partners, you can do significant damage to your relationship depending on how you show up in this space. You can do significant foundational work by showing up well and,
Yes.
showing up as somebody who your partner can rely on. And that can help your relationship. In couples therapy, we talk about the emotional bank account. That's a significant investment. It can hold you over in rough times. But not showing up in these times means that when rough times come up, that emotional bank account might go bankrupt and you may do some damage. You may even lose your relationship later on.
This is definitely like you said, a foundation building time for a couple and a family. That's the message that I'm getting. You can either build a solid foundation or you could erode the relationship during this very vulnerable time for a woman. And it could be your partner, your spouse, or it could be your daughter, right? Parents, how you interact with her during this time can really make or break your future relationship, not just with her, but also with your grandchild.
Yes.
It can. Because if you don't feel safe with a mom during such an important time, will she want your influence around that grandchild? Would you think that that grandchild is safe with you? So it really does set up your future relationships.
I see that a lot with in-laws, in particular, but also with parents, as you say.
Wow. As we're talking on this topic of support for these women, I do want to ask, what are some practical ways that loved ones can offer support to probably a pregnant mom or a postpartum mom? What are some, or even a mom going through baby blues, right? Like anywhere on this spectrum, what are some practical ways that loved ones can show up if they want to be of support?
A little bit of validation, a little bit of empathy goes a really long way. And so sit with them, hear them out, make room to hear them out. So ask them how they're really doing. Check in and show them that you're willing to listen a little bit deeper. Be mindful of not just listening to try to fix. Don't offer advice. I mean, if they're asking, then sure you can give your 2 cents. But the reality is they may just need space to be heard, to talk about what they're going through. A lot of moms are, as we talked about, isolated in some ways because of our current context of our lives. They don't have that village, even in Trinidad, because of the living circumstances. They're not near their people the way that we were once ago. And so, that isolation means that she may not have space where she's talking and sharing what she's going through. And we, as human beings, we reconcile our experiences by processing them. So we think about them and we share them out loud. We're, storytellers intergenerationally. Through that storytelling, through sharing our experiences, we reconcile our understanding of what's happening. And that may be the difference between her living with trauma from this and her being able to thrive in motherhood. And so don't assume that she's fine. Don't, look away because they look okay. And if you see
Right.
her struggling, again, check in and find out what's happening. Sometimes I also notice we can be afraid. I'm scared to hear that she might be suicidal. I'm scared to hear,
Mm.
or I'm shocked to hear the scary thoughts that she's having. With that, empathy and validation means non-judgment and compassion. So, accept, see if you can hear, what she's saying with that compassion, without that judging what she's saying, and just listen.
Beautiful. That was beautifully said. Empathy goes a long way. A long way, guys, a long way. Are there any resources or organizations that you would recommend for people seeking help, whether in the Caribbean or our extended diaspora communities? Is there any that you know of that they can reach out to?
So Postpartum Support International is where I have my certification from. They're US based, but they're growing a list of culturally sensitive providers. I'm on that list. And they do support people internationally, as their name suggests. And so you can absolutely reach out to them. They have many free Zoom calls for different mental health struggles. So whether that's fertility or loss or postpartum, even some groups for dads as well. And so I really do recommend them as a starting point resource place. And then you may find other providers because they have directories of providers in different areas, other providers who have the PMHC.
Yeah, dads also need, right, dad support. So I love to hear that there's a group for dads. Do you have like a client success story, obviously confidential, that you can share with us just to kind of put all that we've spoken about into perspective? What stuck with you?
It is really hard to pick one story.
Boy,
And so I'm not. And of course, yes, we can't talk about our cases and whatnot. But I will say everyone that I work with stays with me in some way. There is this exchange of energy, and I'm sure, you feel and experience
yeah,
this too. I learn something, I get insights from every client as much as I may share with them. And success is that tricky word because success looks different for every mom. It's not always a dramatic transformation. It doesn't mean that she's thriving in her life. For some moms, success is simply surviving. She got through that day. She got through that hard part.
yeah,
She's learning to give herself grace. I've worked with moms who've left relationships that weren't serving them, and that's a success for them. I've
yeah,
worked with moms who stayed and learned to set boundaries in their life, engaged in couples therapy, and that's a huge success for them. I've supported moms who've welcomed rainbow babies, and that's always beautiful. So, babies after having pregnancy loss or struggles
yeah,
with fertility. And I've also supported moms who didn't have rainbow babies, but they learned how to hold their grief with compassion instead of shame and to accept, the journey that they're on, see what path is, what's coming up next on their path. There isn't one path. And every step towards healing, every step, that we take to reconcile our experiences, it matters. And that's really what success looks like to me. There isn't one mom that I'll say, like, she went through this and she's successful. They're all successful in their own way.
Camila, this conversation is so crucial. And it's a conversation that, I mean, people get pregnant every day, right? It's a conversation that should be had frequently. But like you said, oftentimes women experience miscarriages, they're on their own, they experience baby blues, postpartum depression, so many different things, infertility during this a time that is supposed to be a wonderful time, and they feel alone and they feel afraid. So what advice would you give to someone who's afraid to ask for help?
You don't need to be falling apart to deserve help. Asking for help doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're human. And therapy, as a therapist, I don't have all the answers. It's a space to explore your feelings, your thoughts, your experiences in a safe way. And so I encourage you, if you are in need of support, reach out. It will make a difference.
Beautiful. Beautiful. What would you say as well to a first time mom who's listening and who feels overwhelmed, but just unsure of if her experience is even normal? What would you say to her?
A tricky word, normal. So I would say, what you're feeling likely makes sense to think about what you're going through, what you've been through. This has been a big transition, and of course, some of it feels heavy. Sometimes even just using that word, of course, it makes sense. That's self-compassionate language. And so, of course, when you're going through so much, it's going to feel heavy. It's likely going to feel persistent because it's day in, day out. And that's the other thing about motherhood. The tasks and the everyday is really perpetual, and so it can feel very mind bending in some ways. And so it's worth exploring with someone who can help because you don't have to carry it alone. And as Davriel, as you talked about what we had before in terms of that collectivist society, I see it to an extreme up here in Canada, that
Wow.
isolation. Yeah, that isolation is just so huge. And then there's the opposite, people who have their people, but their people just aren't supportive people. And
Right.
so it goes both ways,
Stressor.
but you don't have to carry it alone. If your people aren't your people, then find new people and find people who are going to meet you with love, care, and compassion because you deserve it.
Thank you so much, Camila. Now, Camila has so many great things going on. I'm always seeing her doing an interview, and she's always, again, so passionate about this topic and providing such psychoeducation and advocating for women going through these experiences. So, Camila, what are you working on? What's coming up next? How do people follow you and just follow what you have going on in your career?
Yeah. And so you can find me on my website, www.elitec-c.com. Instagram, as you said, I post a lot of free resources and information. I have a bi-weekly blog that, again, is accessible for free off of my website, but I often will post leads to it on the Instagram at Elite Counseling. And I share a lot on perinatal mental health, relationships, and emotional wellness. I also have a podcast with a colleague, Darby Crosby, who's a registered psychotherapist. It's called Therapy Inspired. That's bi-weekly. And so it's on Spotify and YouTube. You can find us Therapy Inspired. And so if you're looking for support, you can reach out on the website or Instagram. And, I'd be happy to do a consult or share resources if I can.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Camila. Anyone listening, thank you so much for coming this far, listening to this entire episode. I hope that something was said that will encourage you, give you hope, as well as if you're someone who is in the supporting part of this conversation, I hope that you also learn something that you can take away and provide more support, provide that safe space, be an empathetic listener for the women in your lives. And I'll just ask, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to message it in the comment section below and we will respond. I will put all of Camila's links in the description so you can feel free to follow her, support her. She's doing amazing work. As we said, these are topics that need to be highlighted more often. And currently there's a study on the post-traumatic growth following pregnancy loss by Maria Eliza. If you are interested in assisting this research study, be sure to click the link below in the description to join the survey. Your voices matter. Until next time, Keep talking, keep growing, keep healing, and remember the couch is yours anytime you need it.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.